Hey everyone. I don't know what you did for fun when you were a kid, but when I was a kid, I used to go in my yard an awful lot and play with my Star Wars action figures. And I would get down to the same level as those action figures, and it was like I was seeing from their perspective. And I started thinking today, while I was down working on these stairs, I'm right underneath a set of deck stairs, I got to thinking about, what would the perspective of some minis be in my yard? And this is something I've thought about before, but I usually think about it in the perspective of my home. And now I'm thinking, what about my yard as a space for role-playing? Today's prompt, by the way, is space. And so I'm thinking about, how could you game in your backyard and using it at this scale? Like, imagine that these are like little tiny fairy people and they have to journey across my yard. They live in my yard. That's the game. That's the role-playing game in this particular case. You are playing as one of these tiny little fairy people and you have to adventure across the yard. What would that look like? This character right here needs to make it up these stairs. So I've got my handy dandy inch by inch rule, and by the way, this one is exactly 6 inches, which is great because you're able to go like this is your 30 feet of movement if you're playing something like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. If you want to be tactical, you can do this sort of thing, but you can just measure it very quickly. You can say, how high is that? And you know exactly how high it is. And this is what's really cool about this, is like, we don't need Dwarven Forge, we don't need those maps. We just need a ruler and we need our yard. You can even use standard minis. I mean, in this particular case, I've got some sort of like rock monster with all sorts of moss on him, but he just fits right in. I might not use a dragon in my backyard because, of course, again, the idea is that these are little fairy people who are trying to, adventure in my yard. But this guy just looks like he fits right into my yard. He looks like he belongs here. That when my back is turned, he's just going to fold up and be another rock in my garden. The trunk of this Manitoba maple becomes what Sly Flourish calls a fantastic location. I mean, think about having to climb all the way up there, right? And, if you're thinking to yourself, logistically, how would you make sure that all these minis didn't just fall off the tree? I recommend sticky tack. I sometimes just throw sticky tack on the bottom of miniatures to make sure that they don't fall off. But, what a great adventure. This is very evocative. This isn't the first time that I've done something like this. Just using the space that's in your house is a great way to introduce kids to role-playing. I used to use my son's Thomas the Tank Engine railroad set as a role-playing space where he learned to roll dice and make decisions as a train from Thomas the Tank Engine. I think it's also really easy to see, looking at this particular miniature, the possibilities for someone who has a child who's really into the Tinkerbell series. They've got a ton of figures for that. Actually, really anything that involves dolls or action figures, from Tinkerbell to My Little Pony, is something that you could begin to use in your yard with your kids to introduce them to the space of role-playing.